Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host, Q, coming to you from my mother's basement, and I am joined by my co-host, P. How goes it, P?
It goes fantastically as always. Excited for the conversations that we're going to have today. We've got a meaty topic. Q, who are we going to be talking with?
We are going to be joined by Natalie Smolenski from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, as she has just published a white paper in regards to CBDCs and why the United States should reject a CBDC. And then, of course, we'll kick things off in just a moment with news and notes. In fact, that moment is right now. I hate this title. I'm going to change it. It's now called soccer, motherfuckers, not football. The British pound is now falls further and further. I believe in last look, it is $1 redeems you 1.07 British pounds. This is the lowest level the British pound has reached in quite some time. I'm saying it right now. It will no longer be called football once there is a 1-to-1 or a break slower. I'm sorry. I don't make the rules. We just enforce them.
Just set the resistance line now, and once it breaks that resistance, soccer.
Like literally, that is the line of soccer resistance. Let's go over though to Edward Snowden, please.
Yeah, so everyone knows or has heard of Edward Snowden. There is an interesting development in this story. Putin has given Edward Snowden Russian citizenship. This is something that's been kind of on the table, being fought for a very long time, but it changes the geopolitical dynamics of the situation, and of course plays into the narrative that he is, bad for America, so to speak. Yeah, what do you guys think? What do you guys think is going on here behind the scenes?
Go ahead, Q. You had something to say?
I mean, it's wild. I think ultimately, I'm going to say it like this. You know how we've gotten to that age where if we watch a Marvel movie, some of the requests of the villains or the bad guys, aren't all that terrible. Like it actually kind of makes sense what they're asking for, like just basic freedoms and human rights and decency. And I'm not saying that Vladimir Putin is the savior of human rights by any stretch of the imagination. However, he is going out and seeking those that the West has practically cast away and being this, for lack of a better word, like life raft or just an empathetic person to their situation and frankly pointing out the hypocrisies of the West. I think this move strengthens Putin in a weird way to show, I think, his understanding of the fallacies of the West. We see a lot on Twitter going on about, oh, well, he said this. He's calling out the West, the banking policies, the monetary policies. Like Putin is far more based than I think a lot of us want to admit sometimes. But ultimately, I think like this is, in my opinion, Putin taking a chess piece from the West. It may just be a pawn. It may be like an insignificant piece. But you collect enough of those and you push them forward far enough and your pawn turns into a queen. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Magnus, I beat you. I don't know.
I mean, it does go that way, A to B to C. I also want to point out that the U.S. State Department is continuing to say that Snowden should return to the United States and face justice, which is hilarious to me. Like, what the actual fuck? He is an American hero and, exposed a ton of hypocrisy and serious privacy violations. And it is just, we truly live in a clown world at this point. People are, I'm shocked trying to imagine like what the person was like, yeah, we need to keep hammering this point home because maybe he'll come back and then we can lock him in a jail cell forever and he'll never see the light of day. It's ridiculous.
Speaking of Putin, is he playing 4D chess? Because now that he's a Russian citizen, technically he can get pulled into the war of Ukraine and Russia. So someone says, imagine Putin like makes him a citizen. And he's like, yeah, you're going to the front lines of Ukraine, and like he'll die as like this is tinfoil hat. Die as a Russian American citizen, and we got one up on him. But
Chris, get off of 4chan. Like Jesus, your conspiracy theories are just out of nowhere. No, what is more likely is Vladimir Putin is going to sit Snowden down and then really uncover the entire surveillance state that is the United States of America. Like that is more likely than Edward Snowden be given a gun and going to the front lines of Ukraine, my friend.
All right, I'll take off the tinfoil hat now. I kind of agree. It's also it becomes weird. So obviously he's a dual citizen now, or that at least that's what it says. At what point is it like helping one government against another, and they're two adversarial governments? Yeah, it's very interesting. To P's point, the U.S. is like, just come home so we can send you to jail for a very long time for treason. I think the point is there that Edward Snowden pointed out a lot of the hypocrisy that was going on in the United States and the United States government. And I think he's more of a hero than he is a criminal, at least in the eyes of the U.S. federal government.
Let's keep it rolling, though, on the conversation of freedom, Chris.
Yeah, so Julian Assange, the publisher of WikiLeaks, has been held in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison for 3 years now. He's not been convicted of any crimes, and the UN says he's currently being tortured for telling the truth. While those who have committed war crimes go about free. So this is kind of free Assange, free Ross, and free Snowden. Those are kind of the big three that I think are being unfairly or unjustly being reprimanded and reprehended by the first world nations. And it's like, who's the bad guy in this situation? The people that were speaking truths and now they're being held against their will, or the governments that are going up against them. Anything else you guys want to add?
Almost like the state hates you.
Because they do. They fucking hate you.
I'm going to interject. I found the source of the story that I kicked out, so I'm going to do the story. A lot of people saw this headline. The IRS is stepping up efforts to target U.S. taxpayers who fail to report and pay taxes on cryptocurrency transactions. Oh my God, end of the world. We're all fucked. Chill out, guys. Chill out. It's only for people who have been buying or selling on SFOX, a digital currency prime broker that uses the bank. So it's a very niche number of people that are going to ultimately be asked to pay taxes. So yes, they're going to come after us eventually. Yes, get your ducks in a row. I look forward to my conversation with the IRS agent when he asked me for all my Bitcoin, and I'm like, cool. When you find it, I'll give you half of it. You can have 80% of it for all I fucking care, because I lost it last weekend on a jet ski in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That was the stupidest idea I have ever had, but I digress.
My friends, pay your taxes. Do not fuck around with the IRS. Be responsible. You need to keep track of that shit, because this is how the U.S. government will try to get you.
Yeah.
Do not listen to you. Do not try to claim.
This is not, listen,
look,
not financial advice.
None of this is financial advice. None of this is tax advice. Talk to your tax advisor, follow their guide, and get your shit together.
Yeah, I somehow had to pay taxes last year, and I was angry. That was the first time in my life I had to pay taxes. Anyways, Chris, why do we care about Bitcoin?
Why do we care? I mean, it's the greatest asset, or greatest life raft, greatest invention of all time. But aside from that, this company Brink is proud to announce that they are funding 11 Bitcoin and Lightning developers to improve the ecosystem. There's a bunch of Gloria Zhao is on there. I know she was recently added to a contributor for Bitcoin Core, as well as, oh my gosh, I always butcher his name, Taja Dryla.
Raja, one of the inventors of the Lightning Network.
Yes.
Full-time baller, speaker at Bitcoin 2022. Awesome guy. And
also, didn't he help with discrete law contracts as well?
Yes, he's also the inventor of discrete law contracts on, he wrote both of the sort of white papers on those two technologies. And it could be argued invented DLCs.
Yeah, so full-time baller and 9 other Bitcoin developers and Lightning developers that they are donating funds to or supporting these developers. So really looking forward to it, expanding the Bitcoin space. People that have put in the work and the time are getting their just reward. So you love to see it.
I guess Japan didn't learn the lessons from the rest of the world. And the Bank of Japan announced unscheduled bond buying operation, i.e. they're just going to make the money printer go brrrr. Cool. This is on the heels of, and I didn't touch on this at the very beginning. I wanted to wait for this moment. So you have the Bank of Japan saying, buy buy, print. In the same exact breath as we watch the British pound, soon to be called the British ounce, continue to crater lower, you have the British government introducing tax cuts to fund or to stop their funding of the slowly failing government. Brilliant play. Truly brilliant. But wait, in the same breath as these tax cuts are coming in the UK, they're still raising rates, and there's an expectation of potential 160 basis point rate hike. For context, we in America just got a 75 basis point rate hike. So you're telling me the UK, the pound crashing lower, introducing tax cuts, also potentially having a new rate hike, seems healthy. You have the Japanese yen, which we've long been mocking on Twitter as a nice down and to the right, almost as the inverse of the up and to the right meme. I don't need to tell you guys about the inflation numbers we get in this country or what's been going on in this country. Lord knows Europe is on the brink of collapse. We spent some time on BM Pro Spaces yesterday with Jeff Ross and Dylan Leclerc talking about just the way Italy is failing, the way Germany is bankrolling the entire EU. I didn't know the end of times were going to be so fun, though. Did you guys?
I wouldn't define them as fun per se. I mean, these are the most interesting times certainly in my memory, which is not saying a ton, but yeah, man. I mean, we're getting to live through the decline of a major civilization. So it's going to be rocky. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to be exciting.
But it's not just one. Like, we're literally witnessing the collapse of developed nations around the world. And as someone who calls a developing country my homeland, like, I'm just sitting here drinking some water, letting the revolutions take place. And I'm just like, cool, this is fun. All you people who thought you know better, guess you don't.
I mean, we can all be poor together, have fun being poor together collectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone.
Do you like to have fun? I mean,
all I know is when the inevitable happens and we really do have nothing else to eat other than bugs, Pete, I am coming and living with you. Just know 100%. That. I'm pitching a tent. I'll work on the bug farm. Like, we'll make the best insect milk known to man because that's the only milk that's going to be available anymore.
Dude, I think the messed up part is P is going to be eating a steak while feeding you bugs. And you're like, what the heck is this? Where did you get that?
100%. Yeah, look, nobody gets a free ride at the P compound. You're going to be wearing the suits like from fucking Blade Runner 2049, whatever the title was called. Like the whole, it's going to be gross, but you're going to enjoy it. You'll learn to live with it. The cockroaches are about this big, the size of footballs. You'll be milking them by hand. It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Okay, before I throw up, let's go to our next story.
Let's fucking do it. So FTX is going to acquire Voyager, distressed exchange. And so they're totally bankrupt, as we reported on. Voyager Digital said on Monday that crypto exchange FTX, whose bailout proposal the bankrupt lender had rejected earlier this year, has won its assets in a $1.42 billion bid at an auction. Now, we reported a couple of weeks back that there was a bid from Binance. That bid has apparently fallen through. And there's a couple of interesting points here. One is that the company has added its claims against the hedge fund Three Arrows Capital will remain with the bankruptcy estate. So they'll be distributing any available recovery on such claims to the estate's creditors. Yeah, it's a developing story, but as we've been talking about, there's been this kind of cascading set of companies that were over-levered. We're going to be talking about Celsius in a minute, but Celsius, Three Arrows Capital, Voyager. Yeah, hold your own keys, not your coin. Do not leave your shit on exchanges.
So how many companies has Sam Bankman-Fried bought now? Because he's got 30% in friend of the show, Anthony Scaramucci's Life Savings. And then he also now owns Voyager Capital, which worth also highlighting. Last week when we brought this up, Binance was had reportedly submitted the highest offer. Unsure what has happened with that, but just worth highlighting that Binance was in the mix to buy the Voyager assets as well. So at a certain point, I'm assuming SBF and FTX just run out of money. Maybe.
Yeah, and also
they run enough Ponzi schemes that they could.
Yeah,
Keep
he
doing this.
also owns like BlockFi, and their term sheet was ridiculous. Basically, they have till like December 31st to basically get a stupid amount of revenue, and if not, basically he hostile takes over the company, so he would get BlockFi as well. And I know in that deal he pushed out Pomp and Morgan Creek Digital out of their equity position, so their equity position went from whatever they invested to zero.
Yeah, but Morgan Creek can just go to zero, and no one will lose sleep on that. One other thing I wanted to actually, I'll bring this up after Chris. You tell us what's going on with Strike.
Yeah, so Strike just finished their Series B round of funding led by 1031. So they have raised just 90 million to do so. They think that Bitcoin and the Lightning Network can topple Visa. So 1031 or Strike and 1031 have shared a vision for the positive impact Bitcoin can have on the world and are mutually aligned in accelerating its adoption. It was therefore a natural fit to partner with Strike as its lead investor. This was obviously Graham Gilliam, the co-founder and managing partner of 1031. So yeah, I think this is very exciting stuff. I'm interested to see what Strike does with this money. Obviously, I've used the app before. It's pretty seamless. It's pretty easy to buy, pretty easy to use, like a Venmo and send friends Bitcoin, or just even like Cash App or Venmo that you just send them money if they would like that instead. I guess what are your comments, Q and P? Any thoughts on this?
I love it. I mean, I'm trying to not be a dick, but like, yo, Strike. There was a big hype announcement, and let me tell you, I still have not been able to walk into a Chipotle and pay with Sats or Walmart or Macy's or McDonald's or any of the 50 companies that you promised us that. But I do think that this is a step towards accomplishing that, because by rolling out the ability to pay with Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, or at least not even pay with Bitcoin, just pay over the Lightning Network. Like we have seen, I know some of you have seen and pointed it out. I've seen it in my hometown. Businesses have started saying, we'll give you 3%, 4% off if you pay in cash, literally to avoid having to pay the Visa fees or the credit card fees and the bank fees. Also probably to avoid some taxes, but minor detail on that. I just, this is promising and a step in the right direction. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I know Jack actually clarified this at BitBlock Boom a few weeks ago. He was saying that by the end of Q3, so he technically has 4 days for all of this to go through, or at least for the announcement to come true, that NCR as well as Blackhawk, I believe was the name of the company, that would help with integration of merchants to allow exactly what you want, Q, Chipotle, Walmart, Target, whatever, to be able to accept Bitcoin payments. So obviously he's got 4 days. We haven't heard any announcements or any leaks yet, so I hope that remains true. I hope with everything going on in the world, I don't know if these companies are really worrying about accepting Bitcoin right now with the price down so much, but we can remain to be optimistic that this will be integrated in the coming months or coming days, but hopefully
I'll
within the
even
coming months.
double down with, I love to make bold, audacious claims on this show. Should this actually get rolled out, end of Q3 is this week. This is the final week of Q3. Let's say it gets rolled out by the end of this year. I do not expect or anticipate any conglomerate that adopts this payment method to receive the funds in Bitcoin and hold that. I truly anticipate if McDonald's or Chipotle or Walmart, wherever, rolls this product offering out, they will, on their receiving end, receive USD and continue to hold USD for the time being. So I think that will, at least in this first iteration of it, that will be how this rolls out, which again, I've been on this kick for a while and I will stay on it for a long last time. I'm fine with that. I don't need Walmart to start stacking sats. I don't need McDonald's to start hodling. Like I don't. You may think that's a benefit to the Bitcoin economy. I personally don't. I think us exchanging amongst ourselves and continue to grow the network slowly and steadily amongst individuals is far more rewarding in the long term than having multi-billion-dollar international conglomerates starting to scoop up as much Bitcoin as they can while they can. But
yeah, Q, I guess I'll echo kind of that sentiment. I think that that's going to be 100% the case, or a lot of companies will. It'll be interesting to see that, like, I mean, you're kind of incentivized, at least with the tax code, at least here in the United States, to not spend your Bitcoin. There's, it's a heavy tax and all that. I wonder if even they'll be like, okay, we got $1,000 in people spending their Bitcoin. We converted all to cash, or maybe even they take the contrarian play and they leave 1% in Bitcoin. So like, okay, we've got $10 in Bitcoin right now on Walmart's balance sheet. Even just they leave a portion of it. But I do think the majority of them are going to convert 100% from Bitcoin to cash at the point of sale. I think a lot of companies are trying to raise cash. It kind of looks bad when there's a lot of companies that do bad things, like Brian Armstrong, buying a $130 million home while laying off like 2,000 of his workers. But remains to be seen, but we'll see.
On the topic of scammers and grifters, it looks like Alex Mashinsky got bullied enough. We did it, guys. All the internet trolls, all the people shitting on Mashinsky, all the times we dunked on him and posted pictures making him look stupid. He quit. He resigned officially and he submitted his letter of resignation effective immediately as the CEO of Celsius. Yeah, get fucked, motherfucker. Did you guys also, this isn't in the docs, but did you guys see Luna Classic like shot up because of Binance's new like burn process over there? So in the midst of all this Do Kwon stuff, which because I love a good drama-filled morning. So if you're not aware, Do Kwon, red alert. Apparently Interpol is like out to get him. If you see him on the streets, he's like now entering the realm of like some of the most wanted people in the world. It's honestly comical to me to watch this transpire. While all of this is happening to Do Kwon, Binance announced that they're going to do like a burn on Luna Classic, and Luna Classic shot up as a result. How? Why is anyone still holding or using Luna? I don't, it is proven without a shred of doubt how this man stole funds from unsuspecting investors and the likes of you who may have thought, oh, Do Kwon and Luna is going to really carry Bitcoin. Bullshit. That fantasy has been nullified. And these like weird little bounces you guys are seeing and playing, if you've made money, congratulations. I hope you keep that money because right now it's a paper game, my friend. Be careful. Be very careful out there. But that's what I got on the Luna stuff.
All right, let's keep going.
All right,
my friends. Key, were you going to say something?
I was not. Just talk.
Outstanding. My friends, we've got a clip for you related to CBDCs. Specifically, the 4 characteristics of CBDCs that they are trying to shove bodily down our throats. Chris, let's roll the tape.
We think that there are 4 characteristics of, if we were to pursue a CBDC, it would at a minimum have the following 4 characteristics. First is intermediated. Second is privacy protected. The third is identity verified. So it would not be anonymous. It would not be an anonymous bearer instrument. And fourth is transferable or interoperable. So we would be looking to balance privacy protection with identity verification, which has to be done, of course, in today's traditional banking system as well.
This is fucking wild. And it is so anathema to everything that we care about in Bitcoin. I love that he's literally like, we need intermediation. We must have the ability to shove our hand directly into the mouth of any transaction and pull out whatever we want or block whatever we don't. Obviously, one of the main characteristics of Bitcoin is we're trying to disintermediate financial transactions. That is not something that the state should be able to control, put itself between and everything like that. Obviously, also the fact that they're saying that this is supposed to protect privacy, it is absolutely not supposed to protect privacy. Quite the opposite. And, identity verified, again, you should not need to KYC yourself in order to exchange value between two parties. There's so much to unpack here. What do you guys think, though, before I keep ranting for the next 10 minutes?
Someone brought up a hilarious point. It's like, imagine you're trying to give money to a homeless man on the street, and it's like, sorry, dude, I can't KYC you, so I can't send you money. Like, imagine the situation of that. Like, oh, you don't have a phone, or you don't have, I can't ID you because for whatever reason, he doesn't know his social security number. Not that I would expect him to, but yeah, it's just crazy.
I mean, are you really surprised that the people who have been in charge of and controlling our money want to introduce an opportunity to have more control and oversight of our money?
No, this shouldn't surprise us at all. I mean, this is exactly what this should be on everyone's bingo card. It's just, I don't know why I still am, but I am continually upset by, frustrated by the overt tactics and scare tactics and arguments that are used here to try to justify this behavior. We're heading into, as we were saying at the beginning of this, a particularly interesting period in world history. As you mentioned, Q, one of the things that's unique about what we're going through right now is that, unlike in previous, regime shifts, because everything is so interconnected, this really involves the entire government and the entire world stage. And these are unprecedented times. We got to navigate them.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about in a meeting before this, actually, like, how do we think CBDCs are going to be rolled out? And a couple people have theorized it's going to be carrot and stick. So first, it's going to be like, hey, here's $2,000 in CBDC credits that you can use. You want to spend this at Amazon, or, oh, you want to spend this at Walmart, or, oh, you want to spend this at a grocery store. And then we were kind of theorizing, I guess, what are the downsides of the stick analogies? Oh, you need to stake $1,000 in USDC, central bank digital currency, USDC, in order to see your kids. Or, oh, you don't have a central bank digital currency, you can't go to the hospital because we only accept that, not credit cards, not any other forms of payment. So I really do think at first they're going to be incentivizing people to use it. And then there's going to be disincentives or negative feedback in order to be forced to use it as well. I don't know. Is there anything else you guys want to add there?
No, I think this is a perfect transition into our guest. We're going to be discussing this for the next 90 minutes. It's going to be fucking awesome. Stick around. I want to remind everyone, if you have not already gotten your tickets for Bitcoin Amsterdam, you can do so now for 10% off using code BMLive. The censorship-resistant issue of Bitcoin Magazine is, of course, also available. Thank you, Q. It is fantastic and, as always, particularly relevant in the times that we are in right now. We're going to be right back. Chris, roll the tape.
You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number one Bitcoin Magazine Live. You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number one Bitcoin Magazine Live. Stand by.
Thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks. I am excited to introduce our guest today, who's a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I have officially lost her entire bio that Chris sent me is no longer in front of me, so I am very sorry. She is also, there we go, the head of business development at Highland and the executive director at the Texas Bitcoin Foundation. Natalie Smolenski, welcome to Bitcoin Magazine Live.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And before we dive into what was published today, I want to first just sort of set the stage of what led you down this path, A, to Bitcoin, B, to be working with the BPI, and then C, to CBDCs.
That's a great question. I actually have a little bit of an unconventional story of how I came to Bitcoin because I actually came to it on the digital identity side rather than the money side. So I happened to work for a software company that built the very first digital identity wallet leveraging Bitcoin as a secure anchor of trust. Now, what this means is not that a bunch of identity data was somehow put on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is not possible, but rather that digital credentials could now be held by end users in a self-sovereign manner, meaning they truly own the digital data about them. They choose when and how they self-disclose, and verification of data is pushed to the end user, to the edge of the network, rather than the center of a network. And so the goal that my company had was to disintermediate many of the centralized identity platform companies that, in effect, run the World Wide Web today. So our vision was a vision of a peer-to-peer internet, and it turned out that peer-to-peer money was a really good rail for peer-to-peer identity.
Which one of these big tech companies that unfortunately we still use, which companies would we know that are on this list that you and your company were sort of highlighting and pointing?
Well, digital identity is a multi-headed beast. And so different companies own different aspects of digital identity online, and also in different contexts. So like institutional or corporate digital identity management is not the same thing necessarily as consumer identity management. But I mean, any social media platform you use, Google, Apple, like basically the GAFA companies, these are the biggest players in digital identity today. And a lot of their market incumbency comes from their ability to create platform lock-in by monopolizing the use of your data. Like if you want to move all of your, interaction history from Facebook to Twitter, you can't. You just can't do that. And these platforms have the unilateral ability to delete your account, to delete data about you, to edit it without your consent, to share it without your consent. And so there's a whole back end, which some scholars have referred to as surveillance capitalism, which is a kind of network of corporation and state, where there's constant data flow and interchange between the private sector and the public sector, to increase the realm of surveillance and policing. And so this obviously represents a threat to liberty. It represents a threat to any type of democratic governance, because your behavior can now be controlled and manipulated at levels that you have no insight into and not even possible ways to respond to. And so Bitcoin was kind of the first technology that came across and said, we're going to decentralize the transaction of value. But now we need to go a step further. We need to continue building on that and say, hey, let's actually build a private internet where privacy means something again.
This is so fascinating because unfortunately, as Matt Odell shamed me both publicly and then privately, I did not discover Bitcoin for its privacy and its security aspects. I was very much on the monetary maximalism side of things. So it's always fascinating to me that there are facets and aspects of Bitcoin that I haven't even yet begun to explore. I would love, just asking this selfishly for myself, where or how would you suggest interacting with Bitcoin in a way that does become different and become far more anonymous and secure as a result?
Yeah. Today, a lot of the technology is not super user friendly. much like the history of the early internet. I mean, one of the reasons that the early internet was peer-to-peer is because the earliest user base, the early adopters, tended to be more technical. And so they knew how to use TCP/IP, HTTP, these transfer protocols in a peer-to-peer way. As internet adoption increased, we had the sort of convenience trap set in where companies realized that making internet access easy for millions and then billions of people who are not technical is not just creating a new market for their products, but creating like a new platform for markets as such. And so we had a big centralization movement in the late 90s and first decade of the 21st century. Now we're starting to see the limitations of that because, you know, convenience always comes at a price. Even if it's initially free monetarily, there is some exchange of value that's happening that is immensely profitable for the provider of that convenience. And so what Bitcoin, you know, the challenge that Bitcoin faces now is that these Bitcoin-based identity protocols are still very much in their infancy, and there aren't a lot of software products that are easily available to make use of them. I mean, pretty much all of the Bitcoin-enabled wallet apps are, you know, no different from centralized banking services, and the fact that they have to comply with, you know, the full AML KYC provisions, like they have to get registered in every jurisdiction, like it's still very centrally controlled. And so I would say keep your eye on the space and stay tuned. But these products are coming. There are companies building them.
Let's shift gears here a little bit now. So today it was just published. You have recently written a white paper essentially highlighting, and if I remember the title correctly, it is Why the United States Should Reject CBDCs. Let's set the stage. And I love the way you organized this white paper, and I'd love to just sort of like follow that same track of what are you observing in the world first that has you concerned?
I think first and foremost is that we've lost ideas. And by that, I mean, we are, both the United States and other countries seem to be kind of at a loss for what the political organizing principles of a just society should be. The United States has the advantage of, you know, having been one of the early Enlightenment era revolutions with very clear founding documents that articulate the principles of liberty, equality, and justice in a very clear way. And then a multi-hundred-year history of institution building and contestation that has sought to extend those principles to all Americans. The problem that we've run into is the problem of our success. Is post the Second World War, the US established itself as a global hegemon and empire in a way that began blurring the boundaries between what was good for Americans in the spirit of our revolutionary history and what was good for America, the empire, in terms of just raw power and influence. And so a trade-off decision started being implicitly made, both, you know, by the state and often by electorates, that perhaps sacrificing privacy, perhaps sacrificing liberty, perhaps sacrificing justice was worth the near-term advantage of immediate power. Now, you know, empires throughout history have made that trade-off decision. They've all collapsed. because they all overextend themselves. I mean, they get to a point where their resource base can no longer support the expansion of power that has become an end in itself. And that's the inflection point that we've already passed. And so there are a number of global indicators, like the war in Ukraine, but before that, the war in Syria, the NATO bombing of Libya, the challenges to U.S. Sort of the narrative of democracy through the invasion of Iraq. I mean, these were all foreign policy disasters that indicated a kind of deeper malaise, lack of imagination in the empire, in the center of the political body, where increasingly we actually we've lost a sense of cohesion as a country. There's a sense that we're surrounded by enemies, or we're governed by people who don't have our best interests at heart, often for cultural reasons rather than substantive reasons. And so what I'm suggesting is that America needs to refound itself. We need a founding narrative that draws on a revolutionary tradition and that reimagines what liberty, equality, and justice look like for America in the 21st century.
And there's a lot of this, like, as we touch on just the decisions that have been made both in this country and historically, this doesn't really feel like what a modern developed country and the types of decisions they would be making. This feels more akin to decisions, as you said, out of China. Can we just talk about how this intersection is happening, where what looks like would be a policy decision that a communist or authoritarian government would really take, you're seeing it in what is at least said to be a thriving global democracy?
That's right. No, I mean, what we've seen is, and the political philosopher Giorgio Agamben has written about this. The slow extension of the logic of the airport to every aspect of human life. What is the logic of the airport? It is a logic of total surveillance, which at any moment can flip from a kind of neutral zone of transit into a camp. And so Agamben identified the prison camp, even the concentration camp, which is a more extreme form of that, as the logic of 20th century state power, as kind of the culmination of the logic of the state. Why does he say that? Well, because, a state is nothing other than a set of institutions whose purpose is to govern. The problem with governance is that if you don't have a theory of what ends you are governing toward, then governance becomes a end in itself. And so policing becomes an end in itself, intelligence gathering becomes an end in itself, surveillance becomes an end in itself. Today, there are 18 federal security or intelligence agencies that collectively, their budget most recently was $86 billion. So that's like, just under $5 billion per agency on average. Why do we need so many intelligence agencies? Is it really that, American citizens and residents are surrounded by criminality, threats, violence at every turn? Or is there perhaps a sort of an embedded logic of perpetuating these institutions of power that then creates the very violence, mistrust, and social chaos they purport to be saving us from?
Almost like the state secretly hates you. If only someone had been warning people about this whole time.
Whether they hate you or not, that's hate is almost too personal. They don't care about you. Power is sovereign in a way that is morally neutral. Like the exercise of power is unaccountable, it is final, it is not subject to adjudication or contestation. And so this is why the Enlightenment era political theorists said the only way to have a just society was to pit power against power. The separation of powers is a foundational principle of our society. It wasn't perfect, but it was sort of the best model that had been developed to date. Well, now we see, major political party leaders explicitly arguing that we don't need the separation of powers anymore, and procedurally working to undermine it. And so what does that mean? It means whether they like you or hate you, they will behave with impunity toward you. That's the end goal.
Yeah, I for those that are in the audience, if you have not read through or at least skimmed through this white paper that we're talking about, you really should. It's written in a very, very concise and approachable way. It's substantial, but you can really kind of just go through it, follow the table of contents, and really get a sense for what we're talking about.
Before P, you ask your question, I want to just highlight this. Me, the non-technical person on this show, this was the easiest white paper I've ever read. Not as a knock, but because it relies. It's a very philosophical conversation you're having, and it relies a lot more on knowledge of just the macro environment and the world, rather than understanding the nuances of the technology behind this and what's going on. So, non-technical person, highly recommend actually reading this white paper of all white papers.
Well, thank you. I too am a non-technical person. I'm actually an anthropologist and historian. I didn't get into that in my intro, but I'm interested in Bitcoin as a social technology. And so I try to write in that accessible way.
How did you bury the lead? Oh my God. This conversation is going to get like so much more fun now, guys. B, I interrupted you though. Please ask your question.
Yeah, so I'd love it. Can you define for our audience, just to start things off, what a CBDC is? What are the specific things that define it, and kind of why it is being pushed right now by the government?
Yeah, so a CBDC, or a central bank digital currency, is a digital currency that is a direct liability of a central bank. So today, digital fiat currencies are actually typically liabilities of commercial banks. They're created by commercial banks in the lending process. Whereas, cash, physical cash, is a direct liability of the central bank. And so for the economists out there, we're talking about M0 money supply, so hard cash. Until now, there has not been a digital version of hard cash. This has preserved a certain sphere of autonomy for individuals to transact in a peer-to-peer manner offline in meat space. You can engage in cash transactions peer-to-peer without surveillance. This is the last area of human economic life that is not directly surveilled by an intermediary institution. At this point, anti-money laundering policies, both domestically and internationally, have become so entrenched that every transaction conducted through the digital banking system is fully surveilled. And in fact, FinCEN, one of those surveillance authorities we were talking about earlier, which is only founded in 1990, by the way, by a unilateral act of the United States Treasury, so not of Congress. FinCEN has been known to issue directives that require full AML KYC identity disclosure for buyers, cash buyers of property like real estate. These programs were initially secret and now they've been made public. And so in effect, what's happening is that governments around the world they're not making cash illegal yet. What they're doing is they're subjecting cash transactions to the same surveillance that is already characteristic of the digital banking system. And a CBDC is the final end goal of that trajectory, of that aim. So once a CBDC is implemented, you now have digital cash that is issued by central banks and programmable by central banks. And so you can phase out physical cash altogether, which is the ultimate goal.
I think there's a line here that I just want to read from the white paper. You said, CBDCs grant governments complete surveillance and control over the last remaining sphere of financial transactions that have eluded them, cash transactions. Second, governments are deeply in debt and they need money to pay down that debt. Since raising taxes is politically unpalatable, central banks are turning to their control over monetary policy to recuperate revenue for the state. You talk about how CBDCs allow them to do that. And I think that's such an important point. Like in olden times, in the halcyon days of yore, a king or a lord or a duke or whatever had to literally send somebody into the homes of their subjects. They'd be like, throw all your coins on the table. I'm taking some of these.
Yeah.
And like, if the US government tried to do that in this modern age, people would lose their shit. But when they can inflate away value, which essentially ends up kind of having the same effect, they could just get away with it silently. And I think that's such an important point that people tend to miss.
Someone's knocking on my door. I don't know why. Continue, please.
No, I go for it, Kim.
Well, I was just going to make a stupid joke, so I have nothing positive to contribute here.
Anyway,
Excuse me. I
go for it. Go.
I'm really hoping it's not YouTube or just the powers that be, because there was a genuine concern I had that this might be the episode that we get rugged on, as we saw Simply Bitcoin having a conversation last week about CBDCs, only to then have that episode pulled. I candidly wouldn't be surprised if we never heard from Natalie again as a result of the
what I would
knocking.
be. No. I would be shocked and very, very disheartened and terrified.
Mind you, we would be concerned, but okay, perfect. No need to sound alarms. We're good.
You just said
We're good.
He would be, not surprised if we just never heard from you again, because like this was the moment when YouTube sent the theoretical YouTube police to knock on your door and be like, you need to stop talking about CBDCs.
Well, no. If they're knocking on your door, it's got to be Jerome Powell. It's got to be Jerome Powell and the Fed at that point.
You've so shaken them up that Jerome Powell is personally going to pay you a visit. Okay, let's keep going though. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
So now that we kind of like established the basics of it, I'm going to ask the stupid question, but why, from two vantage points, why do we need a central bank digital currency? From the vantage point of the central bank, the government, the state, whatever we want to call it, but also from that other lens of like, why do individuals need this versus ignore Bitcoin for just one question versus just fiat dollars right now?
Yeah, I mean, and the answer to that is nobody needs CBDCs. I mean, there is no problem that CBDCs solve. I suspect the root rationale for governments in developing CBDCs is that they have seen the success of Bitcoin as a non-state digital currency and want to compete with Bitcoin by utilizing, blockchain technology or some new type of ledger technology to sort of claim the mantle of innovation. But, nobody's constituents are asking for this. And that's what's so disingenuous about the eCash legislation that was proposed, earlier this year, is that, these members of Congress are saying, the CBDC will promote financial inclusion for, the people in my district who are struggling and marginalized. I mean, literally, I can't think of any person who's struggling economically who's thinking to themselves, what would really help me? A CBDC. The problems that a CBDC could potentially solve for the state, however, are precisely the debt problem. So, states need cash. We have a sovereign debt to GDP ratio on a global scale that is unprecedented in recent economic memory. Governments are deeply in debt. They can't raise taxes, and they've already taken the inflation route. And many of them are actually collapsing as a result of it. Countries that are in a stronger position, like the United States, are not going to collapse due to inflation. But what is going to happen is there will be these attempts to recuperate revenue using disingenuous means. So through negative interest rates, where you're just like, you're shaving, 2% a week or a month or a year, whatever interval you want off of people's CBDC bank balances. Or you're, penalizing people for saving over a certain amount of CBDCs because, we don't want to cut into the commercial banking system. And so like you can only have 1,500 CBDCs in your bank account at any given time. Like there's going to be all sorts of levers from micro control that we have a hard time even imagining right now.
I'm going to force you to do the thing that I know I've been asked on multiple occasions to not do, but I want to play some hypotheticals out because we actually were having this conversation this morning where it was like, what does the United States look like in an environment where there's no paper cash anymore? It's all CBDC. And like we almost jokingly said like, oh, you can't see your kids if you haven't staked $1,000 of CBDCs of just like the extreme levels of control that the government could then have. Like what are some areas that maybe aren't in the front of people's minds where you're like, the moment the government has a CBDC, they can now control or stop you from doing this?
Mm-hmm. Well, it actually doesn't take a lot to imagine because we've witnessed in recent history what a government extremely skilled at administrative bookkeeping can achieve when it turns that surveillance power against its citizens. There's a movie that I would highly recommend watching. It's called The Counterfeiters, and it's the story of a group of Jewish inmates in a concentration camp who are allowed to live because of their skill in counterfeiting money. It's no secret that you launch a world war like the Third Reich did, you're going to need cash to keep that war going. And so the people who had used their skills previously in this illicit way to counterfeit money were now seen as part of the war effort. And they of course engaged in their own sabotage, trying to play both sides, like counterfeit enough to survive, but not so much that the Third Reich would win the war. And so it's a really interesting film. But in essence, when you create a truly counterfeit resistant form of money and identity, and then universalize its use to everything from giving your kid an allowance to showing up at school every day to, reading a book. There is no area of human life that could not trigger the violence of the state immediately and unquestioningly. And so it's preserving this space of privacy that, for example, Edward Snowden has argued is so critical. And I quote him in this paper because he says explicitly, privacy is not about having something to hide, it's about having something to protect. If you don't protect yourself, then you cease to exist as a social person. You're in effect merely a living avatar of some collective personality of a higher order. And that is fundamentally the opposite of any American, at least founding ethos of political life.
Yeah, we're kind of, I'd say stuck between a rock and a hard place, but honestly, we're just like below both the rock with the hard place on top of the rock, just weighing everything down more and
Yeah.
more on us. Please go ahead.
No, sorry. I keep getting excited and being like, I'm just continually shocked, and in the white paper, as you start talking about and going into detail about sort of the elimination of physical cash, you give some really interesting statistics. You talk about, as we've just been talking about, how governments make these spurious claims about the need for these KYC, AML laws and rules. And the claim, the story that is told is that this has to be done in order to protect us from terrorists and ne'er-do-wells and illegal transactions, and the idea that, if you don't have anything to hide, this has no negative impacts on you. But as you were just saying, that is just, it's patently false. But you also have some specific pieces of information that I think really support that claim. You say that recent studies have suggested that anywhere between 30 and 65% of all e-commerce transactions that are declined globally are in fact legitimate, representing up to $640 billion in lost revenue, a figure that grows higher when lost customers and their customer lifetime value are taken into account. I'm just shocked by the disconnect between reality and the narrative that is pushed so heavily and believed by many around this. And it's frankly, it's disheartening, but there it is. That wasn't a question. It was a statement really, but
Yeah.
it blows my mind.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Surveillance isn't for the powerful. It's for the powerless. I mean, it is well known that vast majority of criminal activity happens using fiat currencies. Virtually all money laundering passes through 5 global banks who are named in the paper: JP Morgan, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, Bank of New York Mellon. I mean, like, these are the private sector institutions that financial regulators work for, either before or after they work at financial regulators. And so it's literally elite capture of the institutions of surveillance. And who suffers? I mean, the 99%, like the poor, the middle class, the people who, rely on an income for a living as opposed to compounding wealth. Like, these are the people whose like Venmo transactions are now going to be available to the IRS. It's absurd.
Yeah, honestly, I do not need my college Venmo transactions in the hands of the IRS. That would be really bad.
Right.
I got bad news for you.
Shut up.
They already have it.
Shut up, he. I want to, there's a degree of this that I find truly comical. And that is the way Bitcoin gets attacked as being this like dark money for money laundering efforts, or it's used by criminals and organizations. And like my biggest sort of counter to that is and will always be right, because no one uses any cash to buy drugs, or none of the drug dealers that have ever been caught have piles of cash. It's always piles of Bitcoin, right? And then you bring up counterfeiting too, which I'll be completely honest, it's just not something I frankly think about on a regular basis. I probably should. I feel like we can make a lot of money, P, if we like actually put our minds to use here to just counterfeit a bunch of fiat dollars. But that's
as I understand it, that's a very easy process, right? There's not like a, just very, very technologically advanced systems that prevent that. Also, I'm sure it's, no, we're not doing that.
But the point of my question more is like, do you have a sense, Natalie, of like how much of a problem counterfeiting actually is in the grand scheme of our current fiat system?
I don't. I actually have no idea. What is interesting about Bitcoin in the context of counterfeiting is that because it is a cryptocurrency defined by this ironclad protocol, it in effect prevents counterfeiting of itself. And so the cost of verification moves down to zero, which is one of the value propositions of Bitcoin. You know, if somebody shows up, to make a payment with bars of gold, one of the first questions you're going to have as the seller is that gold real? And a lot of the gold that's stored in reserves worldwide is in fact gold-plated tungsten. It's or some other metal. It's not actually gold. And so the anti-counterfeiting properties of Bitcoin are very powerful, but it's their statelessness, the fact that there isn't a centralized entity running the monetary policy and enforcing identity verification for every transaction. That's what prevents that anti-counterfeiting technology from becoming a dystopian tool of control.
So we've talked about kind of what CBDCs are. We've talked about why the U.S. government is interested in them. We've talked about briefly about sort of the goal of eliminating physical cash. Let's shift to some of the structural problems with CBDCs as you've defined them. So can you describe sort of the effect that this has in terms of, as you titled it, the contraction of commercial banking? Like, what does that mean, and how does that affect this this conversation?
Right. So typically, most money creation happens at the level of M2, M3 money, and is created by commercial banks. And that is in part what has sort of maintained the fig leaf of central banks as non-political entities, that they're just there as sort of custodians of the money supply as such, or the hard money supply. I forgot your question. Say it again.
Totally fine. No, I basically was just like sort of talking about what it means when you say the contraction of commercial banking,
Right.
as a problem, as a structural problem.
Right. And so the concern is that if central banks start providing retail accounts directly to individuals, that eliminates the value proposition of commercial banks. Why would I have an account with JP Morgan when I already have an account directly with the Fed? And so there's been a huge backlash actually from the private banking industry against CBDCs, because they see it as even if it was partially rolled out, it would cut into their revenues substantially, their business model substantially. The other sort of issue here is, precisely that I've invoked these limits on how much CBDC you could own. Well, that's because in order to not cut into the commercial banking sector, there have been proposals floated that the amount of CBDCs that any individual can own need to be capped at a very low amount. So something like $1,500 to $2,500 per person, which is not like a terribly large amount of money for a lot of people. But if you're on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and that's most of your wealth, which for a lot of Americans it is. They have zero or negative net worth and less than $1,000 in their checking accounts at any one time. And then you propose to implement a 2% negative interest rate on that amount, or even just directly confiscate cash, which the central bank could do if CBDCs were implemented. I mean, at that point, you're literally just like robbing people directly.
Yeah, it's how would that even work? Like if there's this cap, so it would be like CBDCs are this separate type of cash that people can have, and then the rest gets shunted off into your traditional banking USD account.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, does physical cash still exist? So like, as long as physical cash is around and remains legal tender, then people can still, stock up as much physical cash as they want because it's a physical their asset. There are some legal distinctions there, but in effect, that's what it is. Like the cash is on your person; it's effectively your cash. If the physical cash goes away and all there is this digital cash, then it becomes much easier to impose these limits and these controls on how much people can own. And that's really where the contestation is, because the more CBDCs people can own, the less they're likely to rely on the commercial banking system for, in effect, their checking accounts. And I think honestly that, for many people on the left or sort of on the progressive side of the political debate, they want Fed accounts because they want to be able to make direct disbursements from the Fed to individuals in times of need.
Universal basic income style.
Yeah, universal basic income or stimulus payments. Like they don't want to have, to send a check that could then, maybe get lost in the mail or get intercepted. And like, they just want to put that money in people's accounts. And so that I think is the most well-intentioned motivation behind a CBDC. But I also think that, in practice, once something like that is implemented, it's trivial to also use it to confiscate cash. And so now you've like created, in effect, this like centralized control of everybody's bank balances that just expands or contracts like with monetary policy.
Well, since P's muted, I'll take over for a hot second. And I want to talk about, you and I, Natalie, are not the technologically savvy people, but the government isn't really who I think of when I think of like, oh, they know they're the IT people. Like the number of hacks that we deal with, like the questions you hear congressional leaders asking during those hearings we had when big tech showed up. It's like, do you understand how just the internet works? Can we like just dissect that? This would in turn put so much more, I think, reliance on the government to be technologically savvy.
Yeah. And in reality, what's going to happen is governments are going to outsource building and maintaining these systems to the private sector. They're not going to do it themselves. And so like in Europe, for example, and in the US, companies like Amazon and Accenture have been, pitching CBDC offerings. Amazon has a blockchain as a service, software service that they, are proposing as one option. And so in effect, this would be privatizing the US Mint and Department of Engraving, the bodies that currently issue hard physical cash, giving that power to a corporation that is not accountable to the people, and sort of giving the central bank the ability to deflect blame for abuses or failures of the underlying software to someone else. And so it's the perfect recipe for the abuse of power, because very few voters are savvy enough to understand where the buck stops when it comes to software implementations and what is a policy decision, what is a technical decision, and how those interplay. So it's challenging from many angles.
Has anyone, whether it be the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, or the government, come out and issued any sort of plan to increase their technological capabilities should this get rolled out? Or is this just sort of they haven't really discussed, but we know that they're fucked?
Well, I mean, the governments at all levels have IT offices and offices of like technology, and so the federal government is no different. And in fact, the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy just released their report on technical design options for CBDC, where they went pretty in depth, and they would say they didn't make recommendations, but I think if you read between the lines, they did make recommendations. So there are a lot of sophisticated technical people who work for the government. It's just that the governments are not designed, they're not built to ship and maintain quality software over long periods of time. That just isn't a core mandate of government. And so the way that technical skill tends to be distributed in government agencies is around the analysis of technology, the procurement of technology, and the use of technology. And then also, in some cases, the incubation of net new technologies like ARPANET, for example, that don't have any near-term path to profitability. But governments, there are very few like software products that governments build, ship, and then sell and maintain contractually over long periods of time. And so this is the incentive, or not incentive, but the different mandate of the public sector versus the private sector. And I think in some cases, governments try to collapse that. They try to say like, well, we can do, Google better than Google. You absolutely cannot. You cannot nationalize Facebook. If you nationalize Facebook, you will destroy Facebook. You don't know how to run even how to begin running a company like Facebook. And so a lot of these discussions are just people failing to make distinctions and assuming that they can do everything without any trade-off decisions, which is a great way to fail.
No, this really feels like I hate to say it like this, but it feels like the people who are going to be making this decision do not really understand what steps need to be taken in order to make the right decision here. But
Yeah,
That's
I don't
definitely
know.
the case, Q.
I'm a kid who lives in his mother's basement, so like, who am I to say anything about decision makers?
well, we've seen
Um,
this around inflation. I mean, the controversy around, whether the Fed is now doing the right thing by raising rates, just like fundamentally misses the point. The question is not even, did they make a mistake when they increased the money supply dramatically over the past few years? Whether they did or not, they did that, and that necessarily implies certain follow-on after effects, i.e. consequences that cannot be elided. They can't be changed. So raising the price of money a little bit after you've increased the amount of money by like 2, 3, 4-fold, it creates complete economic incoherence. And so the problem here is that people are unwilling to tell the truth about what they're up to, about what they're doing. Like if the Fed and Congress had simply said, look, we're going to monetize a bunch of debt because we need to spend, this amount of money to ensure the American economy continues to grow. And inflation's going to happen. We are willing to accept that that is an inevitable consequence of this policy choice. Instead, everybody lies all the time. They say, oh, this is like we're temporarily QEing, but then there's going to be a period of quantitative tightening. And then we're going to raise rates. And it will be as though everything's the same, like no trade-off decisions. No. Once you increase the money supply that much, that money's in the economy forever now. Like you have to accept that you've now instigated a cascading order of events that are out of your control. And the problem with these political institutions, namely, the political parties, and then the administrative state that is appointed by those parties, is that they tend to reward, promote, and advance people whose main skill set is self-preservation over time. And so they just get middle of the bell curve, like weak leaders who never tell the truth, but who always manage to avoid consequences. And what happens? The American people bear the consequences. The American Republic slowly collapses because nobody is taking responsibility for anything.
Well said. So we started the conversation talking about, CBDC basics, what they are, how they work, what the government is kind of trying to do here. We've now gone through some of the structural problems, or most of the structural problems. So far, we've covered, the contraction, the risk of the contraction of the commercial banking system. You touched on how this disproportionately affects low-income families, how a CBDC would do that. We've talked about how governments are, frankly, just terrible when it comes to technology. We talked a little bit about the security risks involved, that these AMC, KY, or AMC, know your customer laws basically create these honeypots that then get leaked and attacked and hacked. You give some great, just very, very concise stats in the paper talking about, in 2020, there's a leak of data from FinCEN, and it exposed the identities of suspected financial criminals around the world and of the businesses and specific AML and KYC compliance staffers who reported them. Let's talk a little bit about sort of centralized blockchains, like what that means, why that's an oxymoron, and then go from there.
Right. So the centralization of personal data in databases that are maintained by software service providers is, a recipe. I mean, it creates incentives for attackers to go after those databases to procure that sensitive information. And so there are like too many hacks of personal data happening every day for the media to effectively report on. Like it happens all the time, from, very big names, well-respected names. I didn't, even mention the big Equifax hack, and they're one of the primary sources of AML KYC data for all kinds of transactions. And so the notion that we're now going to build a giant private centralized database that tracks every financial transaction with full identity data transparency. And this database is going to be accessible to the central bank, which also means every financial regulator, which also means everyone downstream from those financial regulators who relies on that data. So basically, you're creating a global database that, there are like maybe some fig leaves to access, but that virtually anybody can access at any time. And for obvious reasons, that is terrible. But it seems to be the direction that people feel comfortable going.
Yeah, it just feels like, the frog being slowly boiled in the pot.
Right.
But the
Right.
frog thinks it's in a hot tub. And I think genuinely that's what most people think. Like, I brought this up this morning as well, where we in the Bitcoin space, we hear CBDC and there are alarm bells going off in our heads, and we are genuinely concerned, and we know
Yeah.
why to be. I
Yeah.
unfortunately don't think the average everyday person understands the risks associated with a CBDC. And in turn, like whether it's they'll be incentivized because they'll say, oh, if you transfer over 1,000 fiat cuck bucks over to our new CBDC, we'll double your initial investment. Literally a slogan from DraftKings that is a
Mhm.
gambling website. That is
Yeah.
going to be the slogan that our US government uses. Just,
Yeah.
I've said crazier things on this show that have come to fruition. Before we talk about alternatives, Natalie, I want to give you the chance. Is there anything else on just like the flaws in a CBDC that you would like to take this opportunity to highlight?
I think my main concern is that CBDC proponents, even the best intentioned ones, are not able to anticipate the ways in which this power will inevitably be abused. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. We like to think that, the US government would never just cut someone off from their checking account because they say politically unpalatable things, or because they bought something from a business that is under surveillance, or because they happen to affiliate with some foreign country that is now under sanctions or something. Like the point is that police action is encroaching more and more on just the terrain of everyday life. So rather than being a response to criminal acts that have occurred, we're moving toward a predictive policing model where every little micro behavior can now be required to have permission for before you can act. And so I talked a little bit earlier about the encroachment of the logic of the airport into everyday life, and how that's also like the logic of the prison. We're moving in a direction where people are born in the prison, they're raised in the prison, they die in the prison. They don't know anything other than the prison. And from their point of view, liberty is whatever the sort of the order of the prison carves out for you as the sort of bread and circuses area where your frivolities can be expressed. And that's liberty, as opposed to existing autonomously and having the ability to flourish or fail, in part due to your own efforts and your own success. And so I think well-meaning people, whatever their political ideology, they end up moving in this authoritarian direction because they genuinely don't see any alternatives. There's no political imagination to imagine what a world with like fully autonomous, self-sovereign individuals could look like. And so that's really the biggest problem with the CBDC. It's not the CBDC as such. It is a manifestation of a larger failing of political imagination that infects all of our social institutions.
So well said. And I don't think we actually mentioned this, but Natalie, you're going to be in front of Congress in 2 days discussing this, correct?
That's right. Yes, Thursday.
We completely
Yes.
buried the lead.
Yeah. So this is, by the way, in case you didn't realize it, this is going to be the spokesperson against CBDCs to the powers that be. So honestly, and I'm gonna invite people to do this, Natalie, but you should reach out to her via social media and give her your thoughts on this white paper because it is public. Chris, if we can make sure we share it once again in the chat as well. Like this is a very important conversation we are having today that will be repeated on Thursday. Although I'm going to just my ego is going to say this more than anything. This is going to be the way funner version for you, Natalie, than Thursday's congressional hearing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
No, of course. Thank you for doing this. And I now want to switch gears to talk about, the alternatives that you have spent a great deal of time explaining in such like nuanced detail to make sure people who read this understand why their shitty CBDC is such a bad idea compared to all of these other opportunities that are out there. And I just want to start with the easiest one, the layup that is Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Bitcoin is a cypherpunk project. It grew out of decades of work in computer science by people who had the foresight to recognize that an age of the internet will also necessarily become an age of surveillance unless effective countermeasures are taken and put in place. And so these were the cryptographers and computer scientists who could anticipate that the private sector and the public sector would collude to eliminate, all vestiges of individual liberty over time, not because they're evil, but because they can. And so what is Bitcoin? It's a system that presumes adversarial markets. It presumes that the counterparty to your transaction is an enemy. And so it builds in a certain type of censorship resistance and rarity, scarcity that ensure that it has integrity and value over time. It's also, like the early internet, a network for direct peer-to-peer transacting. And this is ultimately the thing that CBDC proponents find most offensive, is they cannot countenance a world where people create and exchange value without some intermediary that is connected to the state. And so this is the thing, if CBDCs move forward, and they will move forward probably in most countries, I would say it's not yet a foregone conclusion in America, which is why I wrote this paper. But when and where they do move forward, Bitcoin will represent a viable alternative, and it absolutely will be used by people to transact in a peer-to-peer manner. And not just individuals, but also collective entities, including sovereigns themselves. I mean, the Russian government may have been, in effect, cut off from its foreign reserves and the SWIFT banking system, but you better believe they're using Bitcoin. And only recently they kind of publicly admitted it. But this is the reality. Like, it's non-political money. That doesn't mean it's bad, because now, we're in this like clown world where, like, in order for something to be good, it has to be political. The whole point is that Bitcoin is like a DMZ for money, a demilitarized zone, where enemies can trade with each other. And people who don't agree on political visions for their society, their world, can still nevertheless transact value. And so this is also why I'm optimistic broadly about Bitcoin as a project, because as long as, you know, it exists, it continues, you know, new blocks continue to be mined, it will be used. No government can ban it. And I think a lot of people who are proponents of CBDCs don't actually like the idea very much. They're just kind of resigned to it. They're like, well, you know, what can we really do? I mean, we can't vote on this issue. A bunch of like elected and unelected politicians are going to just make this happen. Well, whether or not that's true, what you can do is build open source software that creates alternatives, and then you can use your power of voice to influence the political system and your power of exit to also influence the political and social system if and when your voice fails.
I mean, not if Christine Lagarde gets her way, right? That quote where, you know, where she's like, we must lock the doors, bar the gates. We cannot allow an exit to exist. And then her eyes flash green and she starts like veering a little bit. So weird.
Okay.
The first part of what I just said was true. The second part was not.
Yeah. No, it's like everyone's like a goofy Bond villain. Like,
Oh,
You
gosh.
say that, but
It's so true. I harp on this so often. It's like if you went to like a Pixar character artist and you were like, I need you to draw me the quintessential central bank crew that are going to like destroy the entire world. You would immediately have like the Augustus Carson's, like the morbidly obese, like
right.
crazy looking dude. You'd have the super tall, thin, like arachnoid person. It's wild.
Yeah.
I want to just quickly draw attention to this. Over on Rumble, CBINS1, just letting you know, a CBDC is actually that crypto that you're talking the government's going to like create and pass along to people. We're literally having a conversation about that, but feel free to listen and follow along. I do want to continue to go like down this rabbit hole because like we spend a lot of time on this show talking about like there's no reason for the government and the powers that be and the central bankers to turn around and say, you know what? We did fuck up the money for generations now. And the best solution is we're just going to give up this power willy-nilly and just everyone go use Bitcoin. As much as I would love to live in that reality and that timeline, something tells me that's just not the reality I live in. I'm curious where you, in any initial conversations you've had with government officials, or just what your expectations are of the pushback against Bitcoin when that does come up.
Yeah. You know, I've done quite a bit of policy work on this issue over the years. So again, I didn't get to this in my bio, but I helped found the Texas Blockchain Council, which is a trade association in Texas. And I ensured that it had a strong Bitcoin focus, even though the word blockchain was in the name. And so I've actually worked closely with politicians on both sides of the aisle to pass legislation. And in the 2021 Texas legislative session, we got 2 bills passed. One of them was to create a state work group on blockchain matters, which I was appointed to by the Texas Speaker of the House. And we're actually finalizing our report with policy recommendations that is due to be published by the end of October, early November. So that'll be another thing that, you know, we could potentially talk about. But one of the recommendations that I pushed for vociferously in that context was to recommend to the Texas congressional delegation to reject the implementation of a retail CBDC. And in the case of Texas, we were sort of fortunate in that Senator Ted Cruz actually had already introduced a bill in the Senate to bar the Federal Reserve from issuing retail CBDCs and maintaining direct bank accounts for individuals. And that bill was a direct response, or a mirror almost exactly, of a House bill that was introduced by Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer just a few months before. So we actually do have bills in front of Congress that would prevent a retail CBDC. The problem is that they don't necessarily prevent a wholesale CBDC. And so this is the thing. People like to split hairs. And, you know, a wholesale CBDC is kind of like an indirect CBDC where the Fed would issue the currency to commercial banks who, you know, would in turn be intermediaries for it to end users. If a CBDC is implemented in the United States, that's likely how it would go. It would be intermediated through the commercial banking system. And so I think there are people in Congress and in state legislatures who are very against this. I know of a number of legislators in Texas who are just like, absolutely not in this country. But there is a lot of inertia behind the accrual of power to government institutions. That's just the reality. And it's much harder to play defense than it is to play offense. And so from my point of view, the political impasse we're at requires a really radical approach to government as such, meaning truly dramatically limiting the role of government in human affairs, in American affairs. And that is a much harder battle to fight, because even the people within the government apparatus who favor that are nevertheless within that apparatus. And so there are incentives to perpetuate it, to always ask for more money, to always, expand the scope of, one's job and one's responsibilities. And so it's a moment for sure.
What are some of these other alternatives that you want to at least have Congress consider, or just have a conversation over? I know you mentioned stable coins. Are there any others that you want to highlight?
I think, in the paper, I basically say that between digital dollars, physical cash, Bitcoin, and stable coins, all monetary use cases are covered. Like, there's literally no thing that you cannot financially do with those tools. And so CBDC is simply unnecessary. Stable coins, however, and I write about this in the paper as well, in order to be valuable and enduring stores of value, they do need to be collateralized one-to-one with either the fiat currencies they represent or hard assets. And the problems that we've encountered in the world of stablecoins have largely been due to this under collateralization, kind of crazy rehypothecation, and then algorithmic collapse. And so that, I think, is fine. I think stable coins are they're a new form factor for M2 and M1 in some cases money supply. And so there's nothing about stable coins that I see as in need of new regulation or new policy. They're just a new way of delivering money. Bitcoin is qualitatively different because it is a non-state currency. Its value exists as a result of the network effects of the people who store and transact with it. And so it also, I would suggest, doesn't need any new policy other than governments need to like basically stay out of its way and accumulate as much of it as they can. And so these are kind of the policy directions that I've been pushing for in my work at the work group and in this white paper.
You do make mention of Terra, and I'd love, because we spend probably way too much time talking about the debacle that is Luna. Let me rephrase. What do you anticipate, if any, knowledge or questions in regards to the whole Terra Luna debacle when you start to discuss or go down this sort of stable coin path? And do you think, that very fresh and recent example of a stable coin's failure and collapse unfortunately makes it a little bit more difficult in the near term to justify a stable coin?
Yeah. I mean, I think no doubt in the minds of, I would say, most regulators and political actors who are aware of cryptocurrency at all, they actually don't really distinguish between stable coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, like Solana, like all these different projects. I mean, they're basically just all crypto to them. And most of them don't care. So kind of how we were going back to that discussion about power, like for the most part, power is uninterested and extremely limited in its scope of what it can care about at any given time, which is also why there's an argument for limiting it and limiting its jurisdiction, because it's uninformed on the vast majority of things. And its intervention is often net detrimental to whatever sphere it intervenes in. And so, when the Terra Luna debacle happened, of course, there was immediately a response from the Treasury and some people in Congress that, crypto needs to be regulated. And the reality is that, the fight around stable coins is really just around, it's not actually about stable coins. It's about what counts as a bank. So the traditional banks are saying, we love stable coins. We just want the law to stipulate that we're the only authorized issuers of them, of stable coins. Whereas the neobanks, like the exchanges, Circle, Tether, some of them, the ones that have a vested interest in legitimacy within the US, are trying to become banks. So they're trying to get charters and they're not being approved for charters. And so that's really the question. And I think that's the interesting political question is, what is a bank? What is the trust that society puts in a bank? What is the bar that a bank needs to be held to? And then how can we make the process of becoming a bank less political and more objective, just in line with those objective processes around what's your value proposition, what's your business model, and how do you protect the trust that's inherent in that value proposition? And so that's the question.
Sorry, I keep doing that. I guess
Just so taken back by the quality of the content, you're just reeling.
I mean, to be honest, and like I'm looking up every third word Natalie is saying just because I don't read, nor am I nearly as eloquent as Natalie is. So there is that going on behind the scenes here. Uh, I do want to just give you the opportunity because we are coming towards the end of both our time together as well as this white paper. I feel like P and I have tried our best to mine as much out of this, but are there any portions or segments that we didn't yet ask you that you'd love to highlight and discuss?
You know, I started the white paper by comparing and contrasting the American and Chinese models of political economy. Not because there's any ethnic essence to, people's political preferences, but because nation states or political entities institutionalize values. So they build values into the built environment, and software is part of the built environment. So the reason that it's important for America to maintain its founding political project is because the default option, the easy path, is authoritarian control. That is the direction in which all powerful states trend, without exception. And China is actually a very successful example of this. And so it used to be, when I was growing up in the 90s, that people thought America was great, America's the best because we're the richest country in the world, and people come here to make a lot of money and they're so prosperous. Well, I mean, the share of global GDP that resides in the United States, both at the high and low ends, has been steadily decreasing. Where, we may not be the richest country in the world for much longer on an aggregate basis. And so people who don't actually think in terms of principles or values will say, well, look at these authoritarian systems. They're now richer. They're now more powerful empires. Like, clearly we should emulate them. And this is so much of the rhetoric behind CBDCs. I mean, Representative Jim Himes, like, over and over again, well, China's doing this and we can't be left behind. We have to innovate. Do we? Innovation for whom? What principles are you functioning from other than the mere augmentation of your own power? What is it that you're solving for as a collective project? And that's the question that, a lot of politicians, even a lot of Americans, can't answer anymore. We don't know. We thought it was about liberty and justice. Then we thought it was about everybody getting rich. And then we thought it was about, I don't know, safety or something, like war on terror. I don't know. Like, what are we about as a country? Why should people move here? Why should people put their money in this project, the American project? That's the question that needs to be answered. And that is a spiritual question, a philosophical question. That's the debate that needs to be had.
Very
Natalie,
well
I
said.
cannot reiterate what Pete just said. It was very, very well put. I did go ahead and just, because this has become one of my favorite things to do instead of a lot of other things. So Jim Himes' highest donors include JP Morgan Chase, Ernst & Young, KPMG, PwC. Seems like a lot of businesses that have their hands tied up in financials, money markets, and could probably stand to benefit from greater control over just money in general. I wonder where his incentives are aligned.
And it's interesting to juxtapose that to the community banks and community credit unions that have written in support of Representative Emmer's legislation against CBDCs. And so there is a definite and palpable divide between the sort of elite tier of institutions the like the Goldmans and the hedge funds and the Ivy League institutions and the positions of power in regulatory agencies that are revolving doors and that people just cycle in and out of. And then like the rest of the economy that actually generates the value that this class is increasingly parasitic on. And I will say that without reservation. Like, this is actually an anthropological statement. Empires collapse because parasitism at the top becomes unsustainable by the economic production of the bottom of the pyramid. Like, there are literally just too many elites, and they become more and more rapacious, and consolidate more and more resources to themselves, to the point where the pyramid collapses because there's literally not enough production to support them. And so when we talk about support for something like a CBDC, often it's a coalition of people who are counting on a kind of political Cantillon effect. And they're sort of, perhaps naive, perhaps also somehow incentivized enablers who believe that somehow power simply can curtail itself through the force of, character or goodwill or something. And so I think Emmer's legislation, Senator Cruz's legislation, and the support that they're getting from, the commercial banking sector that serves ordinary Americans is an important indicator of the political direction we need to take.
And can you just go into what exactly is happening in 2 days and how people as individuals can support what you're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, so in 2 days, I'm going to do a congressional briefing on this white paper, which just means I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation. It'll be recorded, like Representative Emmer has recorded a statement as well that will be played. And so anybody who wants to can join in. This will be virtual. Keep an eye on the Bitcoin Policy Institute's Twitter. They're going to be tweeting out a link to this. I don't know exactly when, but that's how you're able to watch.
Zell, don't fuck this up. And of course, Natalie's Twitter handle is down there on the screen for those listening on the podcast. And Smolenski, or @N Smolenski, spelled exactly like it sounds. Natalie, where can our audience stay up to date with everything else you got cooking? And of course, I'm going to do the thing that P hates when I do, but you're definitely coming back on the show, either to give us an update on how the hearing went or just to talk about just the anthropological impacts that Bitcoin will have on our society in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter. I also have a website that's linked from there. I need to update that, but most of the new stuff will be posted to the Twitter feed.
Awesome. Natalie, thank you so much for your time and all the work that you're putting into this, and good luck on Thursday. We will definitely be rooting for you and keeping a close eye on how all things shake out.
Thank you guys so much. This was great.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us. All right,
Guys,
my friends.
It is that time of day. Oh, nice. We got rid of P. Finally. Jeez. I kind of miss like the week we all had together without P here, but I digress. If you have not yet, Bitcoin Amsterdam starts in 2 weeks. Lock in your tickets right now. Use promo code BMLive. Get 10% off. Ticket prices are going up Friday. And then, you know what? Just for shits and giggles, we might pull them up again 2 times, 3 times. I don't know. Lock them in because this is going to be the cheapest tickets will be at this point going forward. Use promo code BMLive so that we can keep the lights on for all the fun and shenanigans that we get into. And of course, the Orange Party edition has hit the printers. We are currently awaiting it. Fuck you, Yellow.
For those that are not able to see the chat, Yellow.
No, pull it on screen. I don't care.
All right, let's do it.
No,
my biggest fan.
The other one.
So,
There.
that's right. That's right.
I've got like 6 inches on you, and that's just up.
You may have 6 inches in height, but I have I'm wider, I'm stronger. My lower of gravity is my center of gravity is lower. The point is, Orange Party issue is about to come out. It's going to be incredible. There's There's a very, very funny ad for Bitcoin Magazine Live with Q and I look like an absolute insane person, which of course I am.
Like,
That's all we
honestly,
got for you today.
if you're a real fan of the show, just go and get an Orange Party edition. If you want to get a subscription, use promo code BM Live on the Bitcoin Magazine store, or use the promo code BM Live for anything your heart desires in the Bitcoin Magazine store.
You know what? Fuck it. Use promo code BM Live on Amazon. Use it when you go to Kohl's, Safeway. They'll look at you and they'll say, "The fuck are you talking about? I don't know what that means." But if you scream it loud enough, they will give you 10% off. I promise. I promise.
This worked at Whole Foods the other day. I did use promo code BM Live at Whole Foods.
All right, my
Don't
friends.
ask me how or what I bought. It worked.
On that note, we're going to let you go. We'll see you tomorrow. We've got an incredible show with the one, the only Elise Colleen. We'll see you there.